Welcome to the Center for Family Care webinar. My name is Father Alex Gusedes, and today we will be speaking with Dr. Al Rossi. The topic is practicing silence in the home. A few housekeeping notes before I introduce our presenter. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to share with others and watch it again in the future. We will post it about a week from now on both our website, which is family.goarch.org, and our Facebook page. Toward the end of Dr. Rossi's presentation, he will be fielding questions. You can enter your question on the Q&A box on your screen. We will do our best to get to as many questions as possible during this webinar. Move your mouse around the screen to see the box, and feel free to pose the questions throughout the presentation. Finally, we want to express our gratitude to Leadership 100 and faithful stewards like you, which make these webinars possible. Our speaker is a familiar voice in Orthodox circles. Dr. Albert Rossi is a licensed clinical psychologist and Christian educator who has spoken and written widely on these topics. Dr. Rossi was a member of the SCOBA Commission on Contemporary Social and Moral Issues for 6 years. He is currently Director of Field Education and serves as the resident clinical psychologist at St. Vladimir Seminary. He hosts the popular podcast, Becoming a Healing Presence on Ancient Faith Radio. Welcome, Dr. Rossi.
Thank you, Father Alex. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. I am really deeply honored to be here, sitting on my couch, talking with you and those watching. So on what I consider to be a very, very vital and challenging and, necessary topic for the day. So at this point, I will say, we'll be around for the better part of an hour, and I'll go on for a half hour or so. Toward the end, I will give some practical nuts and bolts, this and that, for silence in the home. But there's some other stuff that just must be said in order to put that in place. So I'll begin at the beginning and get to the the better part toward the end. Practicing silence in the home. Well, we need to start with some definitions. Home. What does home mean? Home is sometimes defined as the place where the heart is. Now, granted, it's a little geographical place that changes from time to time as we move, but we all have a home. But I need to say that homes differ. So for those viewing right now, some homes are peaceful. Some are quite disruptive and unharmonious. Okay, most homes have more than one person. Mine doesn't. I'm 81 years old. I live alone in a little apartment, and I love it. So my approach to silence here is different than it is when I'm with one of my two children and grandchildren and their lives, and when I leave their city. So the word home, I will try to address it to all homes, but we need to know that we all differ with what home means. In our culture, multitasking and extrovert-driven activity, no matter what it is the priority of the day. That's what gets applause, and that's what gets reinforcement. So what we're dealing with today is counter-cultural. Okay. But as we spoke before this began, silence is not going to seek us. We need to seek it. And if we do, flat nothing will happen. We need to proactively seek silence. And I'll talk about that. And I noticed it many years ago. My daughter, who's in her early 40s, when she was 16, had a little sticker on her bedroom door that said, "Everyone has a right to my opinion." Well, I giggled with her, but it was sort of like anti-silence. It's like, I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to talk all the time. And I used to kid her that she had a cell phone duct taped to her ear as she walked around. Okay, she'd grown up and a mother of three and much silent these days. So that's one of the points I'd make right at the beginning. Silence, personally, leads to stillness, and stillness leads to peace, so that it becomes more or less a state of being. It's the way I am. And people will notice it. Oh, I like to be around you because there's a certain energy, a certain force, a certain something coming off you that I can pick up. That's a function of stillness. That's a function of having done some things to get that stillness in place. So silence is a choice everywhere in the home. And the first thing I would say about silence in the home is that the person in the home, or persons, I'll say home in this sense is a mother and a father and a couple of kids, generally. Silence in that home must begin with one of those parents desiring and experiencing and seeking silence personally. And if that's not happening, then you can have all kinds of little blocks of time and attempts at silence. But if it's not a real possession, a real thing, a real habit set for one of the two parents, then it's just not going to happen. So in that sense, peace in the home is an after effect, a consequence of one of the two parents having it personally and then wanting to spread it and, inculcate it to the others in the home as best can happen. And at the end, I'll say some practical things about all that. So it must start in our own hearts. And it must start with time of silence with the Lord. I'm reminded of Father Hopko's 55 maxims that are found on the internet. In one of his maxims, he says, every Christian, Orthodox, non-Orthodox, should spend 20 to 30 minutes a day in meditation. That silent time, seated, saying some little prayer like the Jesus prayer or Lord have mercy, gently, repetitively, and over. During that time, there's going to be much distraction. Okay. That goes with the territory. But just set a timer, sit and do it. 20 to 30 minutes a day. In my experience, and I give retreats all over parishes a lot, teach seminarians. In my experience, many, perhaps most Orthodox people don't meditate. They're busy. They're doing lots of good things. The question is, are those good things of the Lord? Is my bodily and psychological movement, doing what the Lord wants us to do? And there's no guarantee that doing a good thing is of the Lord. That's a very important point. For example, my daughter, when she was in college, spent a semester in Siena, Italy, a travel abroad course, and stayed with a family. And her thesis project was the baptistry in this beautiful black and white cathedral in Siena. Siena is about 90 miles from Florence, and Florence has a cathedral about the same size and some say about the same beauty, constructed at about the same time. The two cathedrals in these two Italian cities were built competitively. One built a little larger nave, the other built a larger baptistry, and on and on. It deteriorated to the point where it actually became fiercely hateful. And at one point, some folks from one of the towns went and pushed over a statue near the church in another town. Okay, that was hundreds of years ago. My daughter, staying with his family, spent all this time studying the Siena Cathedral. Then, toward the end of her stay, told the mother of the home, oh, I think on Sunday I'm going to take a bus and go over to Florence and see the Florence Cathedral. And the woman said to her, Beth, if you go to Florence and look at that cathedral, don't ever come back to this house again. She was serious. That is to say, the hatred from centuries ago has continued. Now, so my Beth went, but didn't tell the woman that she was going. Okay, my point is, those beautiful cathedrals and all those craftspersons who construct them, was that all for the glory of God? Perhaps, perhaps not. The hatred part of it and the competitive part of it is quite questionable. So too for us. My only point is we can do good things that may or may not be from the Lord. And if they're not a function of the Lord's will through us, as found through personal contact, through silence and stillness, then it just is questionable. It just is, if it isn't Christ, then we have nothing to give. And I'm reminded, of the truism in our culture that the less a person has to really substantively say, the more that person is likely to talk. And that's the way it is. And probably those who are viewing it have found the same experience. So we need to seek this silence and seek personally stillness in ways that we can be in contact with the Lord. The theology is when we're seated silently, saying, Lord have mercy, over and over, that in our interior speaking, praying, is listening to the voice of God. That is to say, God is speaking to us as we are speaking to him. Now, how that works, I have no idea. But Metropolitan Callisto Square and many others, John Climacus and particularly, I'm drawing a name here. I'll probably come back to it. Say that it's totally transformative. If we want our souls to be slowly, gradually transformed into a better human being, Christ in us, I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me, then I need to be in contact with him proactively and lovingly and intentionally. I just got to say that and get that out there. So that's the first thing to say. The first thing to say, second thing to say is seeking silence is not my idea, nor the idea of these many great saints and theologians. It's God's idea. It's what God said he wants us to do. And I, last night at St. Vladimir's, we had a wonderful talk on the legacy of Alexander, Father Alexander Schmemann. And one of the sentences that the speaker spoke was, we, each human being, is in a state of constant Passover. Boy, did that strike a bell in me. So right now, I and you, Father Alex, and you, Mari, and all of our viewers are in a state of constant Passover. The implications of that are profound. That is to say, Passover, and I'll talk about that in a moment, is it's a state of being. It's going from one place to another. So, and he talked about eschatology. That is to say, I, you, we don't live for eschatology in a coming sense. Oh, I can't wait until I die so I get a hug from my wife who's been dead for many years. No. Right now, I'm getting a hug from my wife if I'm alert to it. The kingdom is present. The eschatology, the eschaton is ours now, continuing Passover. So about God's will for our silence, if I were asked the question, what is the single most important sentence in the whole Old Testament? Now, obviously, people will differ in their answers. My little answer is Exodus 14:14. And those of you viewing it, I'd say copy down that little reference so you can look at it later and what comes before it. Exodus 14:14, because it is the text of the Passover. And that's the whole Jewish religion is built on the Passover. And the whole Orthodox Christian religion is built on the Passover. Christ's passed over from death to life. And the Passover of the Old Testament is referenced continually in our Holy Week services. Christ brought his, God, Yahweh, brought his people, Christ, from Egypt to the Holy Land, to the land he wanted for them. He did it. It's a very dramatic piece of the Bible. The Bible is high drama. What it says before it is God chose the people, allowed them to go to Egypt and become slaves, tried to get Pharaoh to wake up through multiple plagues. Pharaoh didn't wake up. Finally, and this precedes Exodus 14:14, Yahweh says to Moses, and in effect, enough already. Get my people out of here. Moses gathered the Israelites. We're told only a third went with him, 2/3 stayed behind. Okay. We don't know how many. Exegetes say maybe 6,000, some say maybe 60,000. It doesn't matter. Many humans went with Moses from Egypt with one day's food to destination unknown through the wilderness. Well, let's try to think about that a moment. How would you or I like to be Moses leading a group of people who, some of whom have Alzheimer's and some of whom are pregnant, some of whom are young and some of whom are old, out with no provision, no land, no identity? God provided. He gave manna, and they did quite well in their time from Egypt to the place of the big sea, the Red Sea, the Reed Sea. So in the story, the Israelites walk along, a couple days journey, then they get to this big body of water, and it's just eminently clear we cannot get across. We don't have boats and pontoons, and we just can't do that. And the sequence is important because then they turn around and they see Pharaoh and his charioteers on horses with javelins, going to kill them. That's high drama. What does the Bible say? The Bible says the Israelites got sarcastic with Moses and said, what? There weren't enough graves in Egypt. You brought us into the desert to die. That's where they were. And Yahweh says to Moses to tell the people, the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. I will fight for you. Then comes Exodus 14:14, the zinger. The Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. I will fight for you. You have only to be still. That's what God wants. And I won't do it now, but I have in class made a half-hour case that the whole rest of the Old Testament and the New Testament is about God's people refusing to be still. To me, that's very clear. It's what he wants, and it's what he's not getting. For example, and in Isaiah 30:15, it says, in effect, in stillness and in trust is your salvation. That's 650 years later. And the next four words in Isaiah are, and you would not. You won't what? You won't be still. No, and it says in Isaiah, no, we're going to go on our steeds, on our horses. We're going to do this and that and do this. We're just not going to be still. Well, there's a high price to pay for that. That's all I can say. In Psalm 46, it says, be still and know that I am God. And the inverse is implied. If you're not still, hey, you might not know that I'm God. And if you don't know that I'm God, you might not know yourself because you're made in my image and likeness. Now, I'm a clinical psychologist. I had an office in Manhattan, an office in White Plains, saw many people of different stripes. But they all said, basically, I said, okay, you're here. You're going to pay me for my services. What can I do for you? And in effect, they would say, I have so much. I have this and that. I have an indoor swimming pool. I don't have personal peace. I don't really know who I am. I'm spinning my wheels. My life is not connected. And the reason is they're not connected to God. They're not silent enough inside to become still with themselves. So today, in effect, we say, we don't say, I'm going to go on my steeds, on my horses. No, I'm going to go set up a soup kitchen, and I'm going to go start a newsletter, and I'm going to do podcasts like Rossi, but I'm not going to be still. The one thing I'm not going to do in my day is find time to be still because it's too difficult. It is just, I would say, probably exaggeratedly, it's among the most difficult things to do. Why? Because I want to think what I want to think when I want to think it. Thank you. And I'm not going to try to allow your thoughts, your way, your prayer inside me. So that's personal, but that's what's behind silent and known. Because if I don't seek it and have it and want it personally, I'm simply not going to be able to introduce it and grow it in my home. When I do that, then it becomes second nature to have it in my home. And again, homes differ. In my own life, my wife's mother My wife is dead. Her mother's dead. But my wife died first. So I would take our two children to visit Bubba, the widow. Bubba was a really good woman and a gourmet cook and loved us. And the way she survived her widowhood, loneliness, was to have 3 televisions in the home, her home, all on at the same time on different channels. So what, I don't know how to say this, but when you visited, there were like no clear walls between rooms. You could walk from one room to the other room and then to the other room. You could go into the living room and hear CNN, and then walk into the kitchen and have Channel 13 and walk in and have Disney. So you could just, but life was continual input, and that was fine. That helped her. But what I'm suggesting is we can, and to the extent we can, try to reduce that sort of stuff. I'm trying to make a case of how difficult all this really is before I get into the home, because frankly, that's a piece of cake once we get it straight. I gave a retreat at St. Nurses Armenian Seminary a few years ago to a group called 30s Something. Wonderful group. They were all single, and they were from New York and Connecticut, New Jersey, and they came this Lenten Saturday for a retreat, mostly to meet each other, but hear some holy words from somebody like me. So they were very cool. It was a rainy Lenten Saturday. So the whole morning I talked, and it was interactive, and they were very cooperative, and it was a really good morning. I was going to talk all day. So lunchtime came, and I said, oh, we've had a very good Lenten morning, and it is Lent, and it's raining. I'm going to suggest we have a silent lunch. Boom. To my utter surprise, the room just, I don't know how many there were, but I'll say 40. The room just erupted with everyone talking at the same time. I just stood, I had no idea what was happening. Quieted down. And then a young woman stood up and she said, Dr. Rossi, you don't understand. We're Armenian. I said, honey, you don't understand. I'm Italian. Meaning we Italians talk all the time as well. Well, we had a silent lunch, and it was very difficult for them, but they did it. And then we debriefed afterwards, and in some sense, they were grateful for it. My only point in all of this is that silence in the home is going to take creativity and energy, but it has to be a byproduct of our personal life of silence. And again, I could give a million examples. When my Timothy was in high school, his mother died when he was 11. So Timothy and I Beth had gone off to college. We lived in the home alone, 2 alphas. Difficult, but we did fine. Timothy, tall, lanky, very bright boy. He now has his master's from Harvard, but a silent leader of the other boys. If my Timothy said something, all his friends were saying the same thing for 2 weeks. That's where it was. And with me, he was quite loving and cooperative, but insistent. So if I had something to say to him, he would say, Dad, just tell me what you want to say. And if I couldn't say it in 2 sentences, he'd walk away. He's that kind of kid. So he played sports, but his sport of preference was golf. He played locally and nationally, went to California, Florida, and so on. And he was really good. He never won a national tournament, but he's playing against the best kids in the country his age. He would always come in the middle. He was that good. And he had a swing that some called like wet spaghetti. Just, on the local tournaments, I'd say, Timothy, I'm your manager. There's a tournament in Albany, kid your age, this coming weekend. Would you like me to sign you up? Yeah, Dad, sign me up and drive me up. Okay. So I'd sign him up and drive. So I do this a lot, not only Albany, but locally, New Rochelle and so on. But he always, so I'd say, if you don't want to, it's up to you. So in the car, would always he'd play his music, Z100. It wasn't heavy metal, it wasn't raunchy music, but certainly wasn't my Beethoven. Okay. After a while, it dawned on me, I'm captive to his music for an hour and a half each way. So I said to him, Timothy, you know what? The car's half mine. I get the radio half the time. He said, yeah, Dad, that's fair. Okay, we're now getting ready to go to Albany. You want the radio going or coming, like any 15-year-old. I'll take my jollies now. Okay, so all the way up, he's got Z100 on, or some moral equivalent. Tournament finished. He's a bit tired. Nice time of day. I hadn't gone around the golf course with him. So we would meet and have supper and then start back. And it would be a lovely drive back on the, how do you say, New York thruway. Sun would be setting on our right. He would take off his golf shoes, put his socks on the glove compartment, and reach for the radio. I said, well, wait, Tim, it's my turn. Oh, yeah, Dad. What station do you want? And I'd say, Timothy, if you don't mind, I'll have my radio time with the radio off. Oh, like that was like new news. He didn't even know the radio went off. So we rode for an hour and a half with the radio off. And he is a really beautiful kid, and I didn't do it to hurt him. But he would sit and writhe and scratch the ceiling and scratch the glass the whole time. There was nothing, there was never a word of meanness toward me. It was just his way of coping with the time. That's what he did. And I just drove the car. Now, years later, he would say to me, Dad, you know something? Some of the best times we ever had were the rides back from our golf tournaments. He now sees it was dual antinomy. It was like two things happening at the same time. He was getting at his adolescent cobra energy that way, but he was also aware of the beauty of the sun setting and the silence that we were experiencing. And now he can appreciate it. My only point is we have to seek it. We have to seek silence, or it's simply not going to happen. So all that said, I would simply say now a few words about my own experience when I give retreats, and I talk about silence a lot. I have people write in index cards, one positive moment of silence you had in your life. And they write it. I do this with high school kids. I give talks at the program called Crossroads at Hellenic College, and always have them do it. And they love it. They have come up with some very, very honest times of silence in their lives, sitting on a, a dock, evening time by myself, just looking out at the water and experiencing the silence. And my question to them is, was that an experience of the presence of God? And yes, that's the way we experience God, through these moments of silence. But again, they have to be chosen. And silence is like the flutter of a bird's wing. Very delicate, to be attuned to it, but it's there. When I was a boy, my father was a stonemason who was cubic. He was as tall as he was wide as he was thick. Man who worked outside, hands were sometimes purple at the end of his workday from being in the cold. And a man of few words, very strong man, angry man, good man, church man. And there would be days in the summertime when he would say to me, as I was growing up, he'd just say to me, come here. He'd be sitting on the porch swing. So I'd go and sit on the porch swing beside him, and we would swing back and forth, no words, for a while. I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Then he would simply move his hand like, thank you. And then I would go. That was pretty routine. That is to say, many times after supper, he would bolt for the porch swing. Then I'd have to go past him to get out, and he would pull me over. Well, they were uncomfortable at the time. I remember not knowing quite to do with the silence, but also feeling loved and his strength and comfortable. And now I look upon that as time of great blessing. So, that's an example of silence in the home. So that was a porch swing. Above the porch was a roof, tin roof, long tin roof. And my room was above the second floor, looked out over the tin roof. And I could lock my bedroom door. And there were times, I used to love it when it rained, because I had a rocking chair. And I'd take my rocking chair over to the window, and the window came down to about knee level. And over the house grew this great big maple tree. So I would sit in my rocking chair with the lights out and listen to the rain hitting the maple tree, pop, pop, on the big leaves, pop, 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 and wait for the leaves to get so heavy that then the rain would drop onto this tin roof and make this tinny sound. Pa-dum, pa-dum, pa-dum. And I can remember sitting there for long periods of time, just listening to the rain hitting the tin roof. I was an adolescent. I was crazy. It's all mixed up, but that was a time of peace. So seeking silence can happen in the home. Now, I'll wrap up my little words in the next few moments to say, for those listening today, 2019, in a family that often consists of a mother and a father and children, that one of the things a person in silence wants to do is then find special moments, seasons, times for silence, sort of demarcated. For example, my wife at Christmas, on Christmas Eve, we always had this ritual when the kids grew up. So it lasted for, 16 years. Every Christmas Eve, we'd have turn off the telephone, lock the door, have dinner, and then from then on, no access to television or phones or any disturbance. And we would talk, she would read the night before Christmas, and we would talk, and we didn't open presents till the next day. So we had, quote, enforced silence for all of Christmas Eve. Well, that came to be, and now my daughter does that in her home. So we need to think ahead and do those kinds of things. When we would go in the car, as we did often to a Vermont retreat or something, co-op, and the kids would be in the back and they'd have their little electronics. At some point when we reached Route 100, she would simply say to them, turn off all electronics, look out the window, and enjoy the beautiful mountains. And frankly, my children were pretty afraid of my wife when she talked like that, so they did it. Later, they would say to her mom, you can make us look out the window, but you can't make us enjoy the mountains. Okay, that would be the little sarcasm. But again, it was, this is what you're going to do. This is what we're going to do as a family. So I certainly would say to all of us about silence in the home, that it's very possible to do. It's very possible to have a very quiet home. Or it's possible, I know homes that I visit where something is on all the time, the television or the radio or something. And if it's not that, it's the children at their iPods. So it takes a certain amount of discipline to have time before supper and during supper, or from 7 to 8 or whatever it is. It's simply going to be our own quiet time in this house, in this home. The silence for the person who's trying to get in the home leads to stillness, it leads to peace of soul, and it's gradual and it's uneven. It's a lifelong journey. I'm 81. I'm a rank beginner, but I do know that silence is transformative. And through that stillness, we can actually see the presence of God in our current life. There's so many silent, so when I have these students and parishioners write a moment for you, I have so many. One of the cherished moments of silence in my life was the birth of my daughter, first childbirth. I was there. And my wife and I didn't know what was coming. And we had talked, and I said to her, honey, if you had your choice, what would you like, a little girl, a little boy? She said, "I'd like a little girl. How about you, Al?" "I'd like a little girl too." So that we agreed. That's a guarantee we're going to get a boy, and that's fine. It's God's will. So in the delivery room, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, my wife had an extended painful labor. She had no medication at all. Then, boom, this little thing comes out because there were no medication. She was Dayglow pink and yellow splotches of hotel bar butter all over her. This blue umbilical cord was attached. And the nurse grabbed her by the ankles and said very loudly, "It's a girl." And I remember I had electricity go up my spine. It's like, I'll never have a moment like that in my life again. It was like God's lightning striking me at that moment. And when my son was born, I had a similar kind of moment. And I've had many, many moments in the home, especially when my wife was sick for 18 months with metastasized bone cancer, of silence with her. One other moment just came to me right now. My wife had metastasized bone cancer, which then could actually, my own little way to describe it to myself is bone cancer is a cancer of the bone, so that some of the bone dust gets into the bloodstream. And then once a month, she'd have to go to the hospital and get her whole blood flushed and transfused because her blood became contaminated from the metastasized bone cancer. Well, after a couple of weeks, then she would become less coherent, but not yet in need of a hospital. And one evening I got home about 8 o'clock and she was fully dressed in this beautiful black dress and black stockings and black patent leather shoes, just sitting on the side of the bed, smiling. I don't have a good word, like childishly. She was just sitting smiling. And I said, "Hello, honey." And she didn't say anything, but she was just smiling. And I knew that she had dressed herself that way for whatever reason. Right now she was totally incoherent, except dressed beautifully. So I kind of took her by the shoulder on the bed and I just pushed her a little, and she just kind of leaned over and leaned onto the bed. I mean, she was just in almost a mental coma. And I remember then lifting her back up and helping her and get her bedclothes on. Oh, that was a very precious moment for me, very tender moment, because I saw her at her very alive worst, though not in pain, but awake, but not awake. And there's just a lot of this. So I'd be interested in our listeners, viewers, special moments that they had. So with that, I'll stop, Father Alex.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi, for your presentation. A few questions have come in, if I can pose them to you. One is, do you have any suggestions for finding time for silence while living with loud and energetic toddlers?
It's a very difficult question. And my son, whom I visited last weekend, his wife just had a baby. Today's Thursday. So 8 days ago, she had a baby, little Luca. And they have a toddler, 3-year-old Milo. So while there, Timothy was spending time with his wife in the hospital, and my daughter, who came up from Florida, and her daughter and I were taking care of the little toddler. And I see the disruptive, loud time that he has, and now they have a newborn, and the home life is way upside down. My answer is yes. There are ways to find personal, quiet time with loud, energetic toddlers. 1, 2, 3. I know one woman who has 5 children, all under the age of 7. But it takes creativity to find that time. So one may need to decide, I'm going to get 5 moments of total silence, and I'm going to go in the bathroom and lock the door and set a timer and tell the children, or when there's another adult in the house, to find time, an excuse to take a little car ride, and don't go far. Take the car ride for 2 blocks, stop the car, lock the doors, and sit for 10 minutes and have silence. There are ways to get personal silence every day with loud, energetic toddlers, or an obstructive mate who simply won't allow anything other than the TV on, or a parent who is taking care of who's out of it. Yeah, there are ways, but one needs to be very insistent and loving and gentle and firm to get those moments. So yeah.
hopefully if there are two parents in the home, we can have a sense of one supporting the other in getting those 10 or 15 minutes of silence, tag teaming with the responsibilities at home. So probably good communication and working together as a couple, as a family, might be the way as well.
Yes, but my own experience has been that when that happens, when the husband is willing to, okay, I'll take the kids down to the family room and you can have a half hour to yourself. Sometimes, more often than not, the woman will go watch soap opera. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's the moment of choice. Am I going to watch a soap opera or whatever else is my distraction? Or am I going to spend my time in silence, which can be much more restorative than evening television news or soap operas or whatever. Yeah.
Today, a very popular term is the word mindfulness, which traditionally comes from the Buddhist tradition. What's your view of mindfulness, especially in light of our topic of silence?
To be perfectly candid and transparent, given the culture as it is, and given our high emphasis on the extrovert personality type, as opposed to the introvert type, mindfulness, and I'm very familiar with it, advocates compassion, kindness, gentleness, love. Now, granted, it doesn't have the same Christian foundation, person of Christ that we do. But the value system is very close to Galatians, particularly, and our virtues. So any system that's out there, secular, that's advocating what I would call a hidden Christian value system, I'm okay with. So I don't have any, I have a lot of people say to me, can I practice mindfulness? And, Keating, Roman Catholic, has his own kind of contemplation. My answer is, yeah, except do it in a Christian way. Just do the kind of meditation they're advocating with the person of Christ or the Theotokos. Just be there for them. And to be perfectly transparent, there's a magazine called Mindful. I subscribe to it and I read it and I get something from it. And I get something from my own ways of being a little more compassionate, a little more kind. So yeah, it has something to offer to me. There's a lot out there in the secular culture. For example, there's a man who wrote a book called The Power of Now. And he's not Christian, but he's not non-Christian. I've read it. I've listened to those podcasts. So there's a sense in which we can, orthodoxy has the fullness of truth. I know that. I'm a convert of 39 years. But I also know that God allows truth to emanate from various locales, and we can't put it down because it doesn't have the label Orthodox. No, we're open to anything. I think of the Dalai Lama, who was invited to Central Park to give a talk on peace. And so that Central Park, summertime, microphones and speakers all over Central Park. People came with their blankets, 100,000 people. Dalai Lama stands at a little microphone and they say some words of peace. Here's the Dalai Lama. He came. For 1/2 hour, he just stood and cried. And he sat down. One of the most powerful speeches on peace one could possibly deliver. Is there something we can learn from that? Yeah. So yeah, mindfulness.
Another question, Dr. Rossi. If listening to rain falling on the roof can be considered silence, how silent does being silent need to be?
That's a great question. How silent does silence need to be? When my wife and I moved to Crestwood, wintertime, snowing, she'd say, let's take a walk in the snow, Al. Okay. We'd go out, light snowing, beautiful evening. She'd say to me, Al, listen to the snow. And I thought she was crazy. I can see the snow, but I can't listen to the snow. Then I just shut my little mind. Oh, by golly, I can hear the snow on the pine trees. The question was, how silent do we need to be? And that's a gradated answer. That is to say, silence at its best leads to inner stillness. Well, there's a process in there of more and less. So we just be as silent as we can be. So So we can be listening to our own breath without saying the name Jesus, or listening to the rain on the roof, or listening to a baby being born. Metropolitan Callisto swears that there are times that we ought not be praying. We shouldn't be saying, there are times we should not be saying the Jesus prayer. He said, for example, a heart surgeon, when he or she is cutting flesh to get at a heart, shouldn't be saying prayers, should be totally focused on that person's heart. So we don't overthink these things. If I'm silent, that is doing the best I can to listen to the rainfall or something, that's sufficient. Then I might become aware of God's name, I might not. Is God present when I'm just, quote, just listening to the rain on the roof? Yes, that's the point. Yes. Is God present when I'm just sitting listening to my breath? Yes.
More of an internal.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, it's more of an internal manifestation than really the external.
That's right.
So really the external would be not superfluous, but it's really the internal that we're focusing on.
That's right. That's our
Another question, Dr. Rossi. Are you suggesting that we balance personal silence with the public liturgical services of the church?
Yes, and more yes. And the perfect word in that question was balance. Yes, we need services. I teach at St. Vladimir's. This afternoon I'll go to Vespers. I go to Vespers every day. I go to the Divine Liturgy every Sunday, and we usually have it, we had it yesterday for the feast. So yes, we need the public services, and we need the balance. But I would say, in general, in our Orthodox population, there's a heavy emphasis on the externals, going to church by mandate, take my family every Sunday. But there's much more ethnicity tied into it, whether it's Russian or Armenian or Coptic or Greek or whatever it is, than it is actually the pursuing of the living mystery of the eschaton of God present now. Mm-hmm. Yes, balance.
Thank you, Dr. Rossi, for your wonderful presentation. I want to remind all our viewers to share the recorded webinar to continue the conversation in your homes and in your parishes. Our next webinar will be on February 27th with President Kerry Pappas, who will be speaking on marriage. To keep up to date on our future activities, like us on Facebook and sign up for our email listserv at www.family.goarch.org. Thank you all for joining us today, and may this webinar bless you and your family. Thank you again, Dr. Rossi.
Thank you, Father Alex. Thank you for all you do.